Tara, and I am currently in a program to become a recovery support specialist, which is a person basically who's like an advocate and basically an advocate and a supporter of a person with a mental illness to another person that has a mental illness or substance use disorder. So yeah,
And
that's
this is fascinating already because your story,
yeah. Mhm.
I don't want to,
Yes. Yeah.
it's
No.
like, you hear addicts
Hmm.
helping other addicts,
Yeah.
yet untapped or yet ventured into. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It basically was like only, so RSS's recovery support specialists, they were only around in the beginning for like substance use, and they found out that like about 3 years ago, like it could be RSS's could be billed by insurance. And so then they started realizing that like they should have people that also have mental illness, and so they kind of
yeah,
expanded it. And with like the whole insurance piece, they started now they're showing up all over the
all
place.
over the place.
Yeah. And so in
So,
my state, there's 11 schools
huh,
that do this program.
wow.
And so, yeah, so I got to be in one of them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
how did your story lead you to this point then?
So it is literally one of the most like serendipitous full circle moments kind of story. So about, let's say in 2011, I was diagnosed with really severe debilitating depression. And I, over the years, started taking about 50 different medications. Just a trial and error process of taking them not even touching
Yeah.
my depression and trying over and over and over and over again to get some type of relief. And it I pretty much actually was like committed to wanting to get help for my depression right away, because my depression really made me very like numb and hardly like able to talk and move, and it just stripped everything that made me
Yeah.
me. Like I'm a very talkative, bubbly person. And I just was not any of those things with my
Yeah.
depression. So, and I knew like what life I wanted, before my depression. Like I knew who I was. And so it was kind of me always like anchoring back to that. And sometimes I would get glimpses where my depression would like lessen, and it felt like kind of like a mirage. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is what I'm clinging into though.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so I started seeing a psychiatrist pretty much right away. And yeah, over the years, tried about 50 different ones over a 10-year long period. And it was so exhausting and
Yeah.
tiring, because as the years went by, my depression got more and more debilitating. And more of who I was, stripping away and stolen. And then also my life, I
Yeah.
literally went from, well, I was a high school student when I was in 2011. So yeah, so like in high school, like I had definitely a lot of like dreams and aspirations of like where my
Sure.
life would go and stuff like that. And it just as the years went by, that became more and more impossible.
Yeah.
And about 3 years ago, my depression got so debilitating that I could not function. I basically spent years of my life staring down at the carpet on my floor, just laying on my couch. And I was essentially kind of catatonic. Yeah, like I said, I could barely talk, could barely move. And I would just like get into this like lifeless stare, and life just felt lifeless. And I didn't even feel alive even at that point.
Yeah.
And, I was still trying medications, but there was literally a point where I was changing medications probably weekly. Yeah, like I would pick up some at the pharmacist and they'd be like, do you want, like a monthly? I'm like, no, I'll probably be on this
Just
only
going,
for like
yeah.
a week. Yeah. So it just, but like as my depression got like stronger, like basically my will to live kind of got more lessened. Like I
Yeah.
knew how much I wanted who I was back, and like a life for myself. Because, as like all that passed and me just staring at the floor, like so many like events and like dreams and all these things that I wanted for myself, just became like no, literally impossible.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, so about 3 years ago, I was kind of just done with medication because I'm like, nothing's like literally not even helping remotely. And I'm just like, maybe medications is not the answer for me. And so then I actually went and so I went to a residential treatment center twice in my life. And once I was there, I had some friends that, were struggling with like with depression too, and as debilitating as me. And they actually tried ketamine infusions
Hmm.
for depression. It's kind of it's a
Yeah.
wild concept, but it actually can lift people's like severe depression that have more treatment resistant, and it works differently than medications. And I won't go into explaining because I don't fully have any idea. But yeah, actually can like work instantly, and within like
Hmm.
20 minutes, you can go from like having suicidal thoughts every single day to like not
Not
anymore.
at
It's
all.
it's so wild.
Phew.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, well, maybe this is the answer because like I'm just done. I was so done with medications, and
Yeah.
since it worked differently, and I was like, I'm willing to try anything because I just don't want to live like this because for me, it wasn't living, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, so I tried ketamine infusions and those that did not work for me. And once that did not work, I pretty much was like, okay, I'm done. I'm so tired of fighting. I can't do this anymore. I became so extremely suicidal, and I didn't want to end my life, but I didn't want to live the
This
life I
life.
was living because it wasn't a life. So yeah, it became really hard, and I realized that like as I kept on putting my hopes on medication after medication, it became so much harder to be like, okay, this one's going to work. Okay, that one
Yeah.
didn't work. So this one. And it just completely dampened that like fire within me light to keep on going.
Yeah.
And yeah, so once then ketamine infusions didn't work, I then tried what is called known as TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation. It kind of works like ECT, but
Hmm.
um, that also didn't work. And I was I was so extremely depressed and like just went days and days without even talking and like being able to move. I was like essentially, yeah, in a catatonic state, honestly. Um, and so then I would also, as everything didn't work, I was just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired of fighting, and every single effort I'm doing is not working. So I just like, what's the point even? And so yeah, so then I became very suicidal again. And I started having these like physical urges within my body to literally act on suicide and intrusive images and everything. And it was just horrible.
Yeah.
And I basically also couldn't like remain safe. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to residential again and try to get like some type of stability and maybe my hope back because I literally didn't have it anymore. And when I was there, something actually kind of insane happened. My last day there, like my last week there, my psychiatrist actually, well, I like went to my psychiatrist and I was like, I don't think medications are going to work for me. So I, don't think you're going to be able to help me, but I guess whatever, we'll see. So I was like not optimistic,
Sure.
obviously.
Understandable.
Um, but he was like, "Well, Tara, I noticed in, your a gene site testing, which is like how you find out if like medications, which medications work for you and everything." And he was like, "I noticed you had a folate deficiency." And most people don't know this, but folate actually breaks down to serotonin. And
Hmm.
so, he's like, I'm just theorizing here, but if your brain had the inability to create the serotonin it needed, maybe that's why antidepressants couldn't work for you. And I was like, what?
What?
Okay, that makes sense, but like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so he started me on a folate pill. Like, well, first when I first got there, he started me on a folate pill, but then the last week, nothing was helping. My depression was still as severe as it was, and so he's like, okay, I'm actually going to give you the broken down version, which is known as L-methylfolate, and I'm not even exaggerating. Within 5 days, my depression lifted almost completely,
Hmm.
and I was able to talk and laugh and smile and literally feel again. And it was so wild, but I was so excited and just like I couldn't believe it. It was truly a
Yeah.
miracle. And I was like, I've literally been given a second chance at life at this
Yeah.
point. Yeah, it was amazing. And I left residential, and everyone was like, oh my God, we can recognize you again.
Yeah.
Like your spirit, like everything is there that wasn't there
Was there
before.
before? Yeah.
Yeah, and, that lasted, unfortunately, only 2 weeks, because 2 weeks later, I was then diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, And with complex PTSD, I started having these episodes where my body went into complete paralysis. So I would go from like any position, standing to sitting, and collapse into a paralysis state. And the body does this actually as an effort to survive.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like the play dead response in possums. That's
Yeah.
basically essentially what my body does. And these episodes could last up to an hour, started happening every single day and up to 3 times a day. And so once again, I was unable to function,
Yeah.
unable to live the life I wanted to live, and was more honestly in a state of paralysis than I was even able to
Before.
function. So I then became again very suicidal because I was like, okay, I'm seriously done. Like, I just survived the fight of my life. How the hell do I manage to do this when like it's also very rare, this trauma response.
Yeah.
Um, and also with it, I discovered why my depression had to be so debilitating. And that was because I found out in 2010, so a year before my depression started, I was actually raped in high school. So, so with that realization and these paralysis episodes happening, I was just like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like I literally, I'm just so exhausted, and like I said, not many professionals even knew how to help it or
How to do
even
that.
see
Yeah.
it before, and it was just it it wasn't living again, and so I'm just like I can't do this anymore. And as I was like moments away from attempting, I thought to myself and I was like, okay, you really only have two options at this point. One is you do end your life. I mean, I'm so tired of fighting. I didn't even think I had a fight left in me anymore. Um, but then option two was the idea that I was like, okay, well, what if all of my effort and all these years eventually somehow in some way, whenever it is, I did figure out how to still live a meaningful and purposeful life and
Yeah.
things that I wanted, and maybe it's not exactly at all how I pictured it, but it still mattered enough and I could still live enough even with these challenges. I could then go to someone in the exact same state I'm in, the hopelessness and suicidal thoughts and all that, and be like, well, I'm literally living proof that it does get better and it is possible to function even after a mental illness diagnosis. And this was something that was like strong enough to carry me through all my moments of um being suicidal, because I just wanted to kind of be that symbol of hope for people. If I could do it, then other people could. And so I obviously chose not to give up. And through working with my therapist over the last like 3 years and just doing a lot of like healing work and stuff like that, my paralysis episodes are only 3 times a month now. And about a year and a half ago, I found out about the RSS program. And so being a recovery support specialist was exactly what I always wanted to do. I wanted to share my story and be that symbol of hope for someone and know that like my pain can turn into like a profound purpose. So it's insane because I didn't even think I could go back to school,
Yeah.
or if I did, what would I do? Um and now I'm literally doing exactly what I wanted and
Yeah.
needed in that moment. And yeah, like I said, it's literally the most full circle
Yeah.
thing because I can now work with clients and everything and be like, they can share that they don't have any hope. And I'm like, I get it.
I know.
I've been there. It makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, but yeah, but I'm still sitting here and maybe one day you can then sit, opposite of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, with someone. So yeah,
Well, first of all, we're glad that you chose this direction,
thank you.
for sure. I have a lot of questions,
Mhm,
just for my own curiosity, but just mainly because I don't understand a lot of
mhm.
it, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. And that's why I don't, enjoy is a terrible word for this,
No,
but enjoy this.
yeah, for sure.
starting with though, like how do you? And maybe you don't fully grasp it just yet either, but how do you? How does your body? How does your mind forget something so traumatic? And what have you come to understand? Maybe I should say it like that. What have you come to understand about
Yeah.
your mind and your body when it has such a traumatic event that pushed all this, for lack of a better term, pushed all that aside, but then
Yeah.
caused this chaos, on the outside?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the I don't know if people have heard the term, but I know that it's getting more heard. But the body really does keep the score. The
Hmm.
body really does internally hold that trauma, and trauma really isn't what happened to you; it's what happens inside you.
Right.
And so, when a traumatic event like that can happen, especially if you're more in like the younger mind, it becomes so overwhelming to our nervous system, and so our brain just kind of then will shut down. And in some cases, it will go into the paralysis episodes, like, I described. And essentially, our nervous system has three states. We have safety and connection, fight or flight, which is what most people know of. And then there's freeze or shutdown. And the freeze or shutdown is then the state where, like, all the thinking and emotion piece literally goes offline. And the only part of the brain is the reptilian brain. Um, which like controls your autonomic nervous system, so like
Yeah.
breathing and stuff like that. And so when the nervous system is so overwhelmed because of trauma, the shock, the fear, all that, it then can actually completely turn off, and your
Yeah.
body then can go into that play dead response.
Yeah.
And so in from my understanding, that when what happened to me, I did go into a paralysis state. And so that's when my brain was like, okay, we can't handle this. We literally, it is too much for our nervous system to
Yeah.
handle and for ourselves to wrap our head around. So it's going to completely suppress it. And the way it kind of did suppress it was also then creating the depression that was so
Sure.
debilitating and strong, because my body was like, hey, look, we know what happened. We got to deal with this. Like, this isn't okay. Like,
Yeah.
but the brain is like, no, it's the protective piece. It's like, no, we
We can't.
cannot grasp this, we cannot handle this. So in whatever way, over the years, as my body kind of was like
Yeah.
screaming to be heard, my depression was like, nope, we're just gonna numb you out completely. You can't feel, because if you do feel, you
This is
know
what, yeah.
um yeah. And I had anxiety over the years, more like social anxiety, which was so much more broad. But as I closely learned what happened to me, the anxiety became more localized, and not just about like me, people in a room. It was more
Right.
somewhat like with like men or certain things. And so it really was kind of wild that there were so many responses over the years. My body
Yeah.
was trying to tell me what was going on, and I it just couldn't grasp it.
Yeah.
So when my depression then lifted, my body was able to be like, "Oh my god, okay, well, this is what happened." And so I started having also these what is known as like somatic flashbacks, and it's basically like a body flashback, so you feel what your trauma is through the body. There's also emotion ones, and there's visual, which is most what people know of
Right.
flashbacks. And you can also get them all together, but sometimes those become like not as integrated, and they become separate, and that's what happened to me. So first was like kind of the body flashback, and so it was the body kind of telling me what happened. And then over some course of the months, as I was like processing and talking about it, with in therapy and stuff like that, I started getting the visuals. And so then those visuals was kind of that, it was me like kind of realizing like, oh, that's a piece to the
That's a
puzzle.
piece.
Like
Yeah.
that, like I knew what happened, but I couldn't fully remember it. But it was like, I know because my body's saying it. And then it was those visuals. And so then over the last 3 years, those I've had like emotion flashbacks, visual and somatic, and then sometimes all three. But it was also kind of fascinating, because I realized that my brain literally was like, we can't handle all the pieces integrated
Yeah.
together. It's just far too much.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna right now only deal with the emotion, and that's
Yeah.
fucking hell. Sorry,
Yeah.
excuse my language, but
No.
um, but yes. And then it was like the visuals, and then so yeah, and then over the years, it has kind of
Yeah.
all come together. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It is. And I mean,
Mhm.
so many times, right? You hear people, tell their story and it's like, what, 10 years? Like, wait, why were you waiting so long? And like, you wish people
Yeah,
understood, and we don't fully understand it yet either, right? I
right.
mean, there's so much to unpack, but
Hmm.
you wish that most people heard that kind of thing more often, then it would make sense, because it's like, no, it's not,
Yeah.
It's not that I necessarily didn't want to. That's part of it. I mean, my body
Right.
shut it down. My mind was like, nah,
Exactly.
I'm going to hold on to this because I don't want this to all make you fall apart,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
And
unravel
and
all at
it
one
makes
time.
sense that it would be too much for us
Yeah.
to like comprehend. And yeah, because that stuff shouldn't happen. It does,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but yeah.
So
Hmm.
as you go along and you're I don't want to say like trying all these things. I think the other thing that most people look at when it comes to like medications, and I could just see a doctor even like saying the same thing out loud or even in their head. It's like, well, you didn't even give it a chance, or
Hmm.
like what do you mean it didn't work? Like it's supposed to work. All those kind of things, and then just
Yeah.
the everyday Joe looking at it like, well, medications, you could two sides of that story, right? People are like, I don't
Hmm.
believe in medication. Of course it didn't work. And other people saying exactly similar, like the doctor would say, like, what do you mean, like a week? Like that's not even anything when it comes to, shoot, when you talk about just talking vitamins, they tell you almost like 2 months. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't gotta spend this money again.
Yeah.
Um, so how did you manage that piece along the way? Not even just like the mental part of going, this didn't work again, but like physically having to have that conversation, and then and then on top of that, like mentally, like preparing yourself that, well, here we go again, over and over and over, years after years.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I also experienced, since I was on so many different medications and like a bunch sometimes all at once, I experienced some really intense flashbacks.
Sure.
Or like not flashbacks, excuse me, side effects. And like I was even on one which was actually, it was a medication, it was a patch, and that also created hallucinations at one point.
Yeah.
And so it just, I mean, it was just an array of so many different ones, but I did know for such a, huge piece, friends or like, just people in general, you hear that medications really can help so much with depression and, and with mental illness, like management and stuff like that. And I know also people who like, take one or three and then that's like the magic one for them. So
Right.
I think that was just me kind of like desperately like wanting to
Yeah.
find which one would work. And I was like, and I knew that it was like, it wasn't also like a mindset thing. Like I literally, which I think some people could see, like, is your depression like more situational or something like that?
Yeah.
And for me, and even like sometimes like, therapists would kind of just be like, well, what were you thinking of them in the moment? I'm like, no, like you don't understand. Like I literally wake up with this such heaviness feeling
Yeah.
physically in my body. So my depression manifested very much physically too, which makes sense now if you all look back on it.
Right.
And it was like this such heaviness that felt like it was like literally weighing me down, almost like as if every ounce of earth's gravity was like pushing and
Oh,
forcing me down. And so it wasn't anything that was like, that I was thinking that kind of created and manifested this depression. It was like I literally, the instant I woke up, I felt
there
it.
it was. Yeah.
And yeah. And so that's why I was like, okay, well, since it's so physical, maybe then it would make the most sense
Well, that
that
makes sense. Yeah.
medications and, switching things up in that way would help it so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, part of that is, I don't want to say that's part of the process, but it
mhm.
kind of, I mean, even just, take away, if you want to just, if you're not a fan, if you're not a believer of like, mental illness, mental health altogether, like it is a
Yeah,
thing when it even just we're talking about like physical ailments, like
exactly.
this worked for you, but it may not be for me. Your bodies are
Hmm.
different. And so it stands to reason that your mind is too. But
Yeah.
how do you speak to somebody that, may look at that lens of, having all these like trials and errors to be like, well, these doctors just don't understand, versus the mentality that you really is hard to do, but should get to, is the fact that everything, no matter how long you've been, used to a disease, an illness, whatever,
Hmm.
there's always some variable that's going to sneak up on you. And like, we don't know anything about that. So of course you're going to have these, back and forth, and finally finding, it's not that the doctor previous necessarily didn't know what they were doing,
Right.
but you have somebody new that like can figure it out. So how do you work through that? And then what do you tell somebody that, might come to you and be like, hey, I'm done. And you get them to like, hold on a second, hear this.
Yeah. It's hard because it is so defeating.
Yeah.
It's such a, such a defeating process. Um, I think for me, I just kept on, kind of thinking of the goal and picturing keep on keeping the image of my life that when things get better, what will that look like? And kind of, anchoring to that. And so that was very much where I was, and I've also kind of been always like a person like, okay, that didn't work. We're just going to try another one. And just, I've always kind of had that. Also, I've had that like, kind of like stubbornness of just like, okay, well, eventually I'm going to get through this because I don't want anyone telling me
That
or
I can't.
anything to keep me from living the
Yeah.
life I wanted to live. So yeah, but it's very much like an internal
Yeah.
battle that you definitely have to go through. And losing that hope is one of the most difficult pieces, I think. And I definitely know that it happens because obviously it happened to me. And so I remember when I was working because I had to do 2 internships for my RSS program. And one of my clients was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't even have hope anymore. Like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I was like, it makes sense that you don't have hope anymore. Like,
Yeah.
after everything you've been through and how
Sure.
defeating life has been, that's completely
Yeah.
understandable. I've been there. And so I was like, so you know what? You don't have to have that. But for me and everyone else here, we'll hold that hope until you can again.
Yeah.
And I think, and I had some people in my life kind of say similar. And it was like even when I got to a point where I was like done, they were still willing to, so having that support piece and also having a therapist who was absolutely incredible and has been convinced in some way, in some shape or form, I would get through this and figure it out. And that, like, he stuck along with me through that journey. Yeah, I think that's a huge piece too, even when you first don't even when you lose that hope within yourself
Yeah.
for things to get better, because that trial and error process is so exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it is challenging because sometimes it's kind of like but you do realize how much resilience you have within you, um when you realize how much you can still keep going even without hope,
Yeah.
you know as long as you have other people holding it for you or support systems or anything like that. Like, I think that
Yeah.
makes all the difference.
So now
Mhm.
that you've come, full circle, as you said, and then, just kind of insane,
Yeah.
and to use your words there, to be where you are,
Mhm.
what is the most like unbelievable part that you've discovered about yourself along this process to be able to stand there, sit there, whatever it is to share this kind of a story? What's been the most unbelievable part that you've learned?
Yeah. I think personally for me is whenever people say like your stories is so inspiring and that like people telling me that I'm an inspiration, I have heard it before, and every single time I'm just like, well, that's kind of wild. And I think I see it slightly differently where like I don't see myself as an inspiration. I can see myself as inspiring, but I think that kind of I think the inspiration comes from like internally with everyone. Like, everyone has that resilience and that
Yeah.
capability to keep going. I think humans are just innately strong in that way. So it's almost like hearing my story then sparks that inspiration within them. So like, yeah, it could be inspiring, but they still find it, they still
Yeah.
find that willingness to keep going. And I've had some people that have because I've shared my story online a lot. I'm like big on social media and stuff. And I've had some people that said like, because of you, I didn't give up. And I'm like,
Phew.
well, I might have helped you, get through those moments, but in the end, you
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 did
did
it.
it. Like, you did the
Yeah.
hard work just as I did. And but it is really wild to hear people,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I don't, this is just my story. Like and some people are like, how did you do it? A lot of people will ask that. And I'm like, how did I do it? It
Mhm.
is hard to like look back on it.
Yeah.
Um, but it's such like it's literally one of the most honor and a privilege to hear others share their difficulty, and they do get inspired, and they
Yeah.
do um even just the sense of like that they're not alone, like just hearing what I have to
Yeah.
say and knowing that like, okay, there's some comfort in like, I'm not the only one going through
Yeah.
this. And that's just like the biggest piece I think ever to have when we are struggling, because it's like when you're feeling alone and like no one else is going through it, even as rare as it can be, even with my paralysis episodes or whatever, hearing someone be like, I've been there in one way, shape, or form, or I've, thought the ways things, or I've gotten to that defeated place and hopeless place.
Yeah.
And it's like, together you have that unity and you feel like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I can do this if I'm not the only one, So
Yeah.
yeah, I honestly think that, it- and also the fact that as an RSS, the people are willing to feel that I'm a safe person to share
Yeah.
with, and that they just enjoy talking to me, and it's like that honor and privilege that I get to walk that journey, some part of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like we're all kind of chapters in each other's stories, and that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. It really
Yeah.
is. Well,
Mhm.
I appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you.